Tamarra Love's sculptures explore the roles and stereotypes of women in faith communities by looking at three Old Testament figures, Hannah, Esther, and Ruth. Her work is part of an exhibit at First United Methodist Church, Chicago Temple, called The Power of Women. We welcome Tamarra, who is also a fellow Different Drummers host. Tamarra, tell us a little bit about your faith and your artistic background.
Well, actually, my art started with just doodling as a child, and I usually found a lot of time, unfortunately, during service on Sundays to doodle, but I usually would doodle the things that I saw in the stained glass, and I try to emulate that because they were really bold outlines, so I could follow that. And then I realized that there were more men being drawn than women, and sometimes it would make me question how many women were in the Bible and what was going on. So that started my interest in drawing, and people, my mother and my grandparents would say, you know, that was a really nice drawing, or you did that? So after a while, I started realizing that I wanted to go further with the 2D and turn it into 3D and actually bring some of those things to life. And I didn't find many icons for women in the Bible. I would always see crucifixes and Jesus definitely on the cross, or the Pietà with Mary holding him. And that was really my only association with those types of things, unless I went to Catholic churches. So that's where my art started, I believe, in the church and drawing and looking at the stained glass and the artwork that was going on around me. And it gave me a lot of inspiration.
And did you ever imagine when you were doodling, although it sounds more sophisticated than my doodling, that this would turn into more of a calling for you?
Not at all. I always knew that I was taught if you have a gift to practice it, idle hands are the devil's workshop, things like that. So I always thought if I had a pencil in my hand or a ball of clay and I had time to kill, I wouldn't complain. I would just do something with that time. And when I got in high school, I won a Wabansi scholarship by happenstance for some sculptures I did. And I actually did more research about them because I wanted to have a representation of the music that the youth of today were doing. So I did sculptures of little hip hop guys. Okay. And I really wanted to capture their mood and how they are rejected by society when they're just trying to find their voice. So I made these little icons again of these little guys, and I won a Wabansi scholarship in high school for that.
For doing that work. Okay.
But once again, I was destined to be a doctor, and I wanted to study biology and chemistry, so it was always on the back burner, but I was taught to have a plan B, or, you know, always practice your instrument, always do something to manage your stress even as life gets hard. So I got into North Central College for biology, for pre-med program, and I took a ceramics class, which is mandatory. And I made a belly, literal stomach, made out of terracotta.
Biology student's art.
And it was just a belly in a box. And to me, it looked like a Kleenex box. But I guess it was so impressive to the teacher that she just said, "What is your major?" And I said, "Biology." And she said, "You should really consider doing this." So she pushed me, and I started showing her my sketchbook, which she didn't know I could do, and how in-depth the sketches were. And I said, "I think I could bring these things into 3D if I do this and this and that." And she said, you should do this, and you should try this." So they basically gave me free reign to the studio, and I started doing my art in the process that they taught me to do your research, think about it, draw it out. And in doing that, I started realizing that I wanted to do these figures, Hannah, Ruth, and Esther, from the Bible, because I wanted something that represented some of the powerful women that I knew existed when I was growing up, but no one ever helped me or showed me who they were, how to research more about them. So that's where
How did you come to choose Hannah, Esther, and Ruth? Are they the three that were your favorites, or?
They literally popped out because of the books in the Bible. And I first started with Ruth because Ruth is the only woman who's mentioned both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, which I thought was really interesting. Mm-hmm. But I don't remember hearing very many stories about her. I remember hearing about her husband. I remember hearing about the story about the land, and I never heard about her. And
as a person.
As a person, and what she did, because I thought as a woman, and I'm growing up to be a woman, I would like to see how some of these women dealt with some of these horrible things that were going on. Hannah came because I know I'm a mother, so I know what it's like to want a child, and reading her story about Hannah praying incessantly for her and then she had to give him up to Levitical service. So not only did she want to have him so badly, she also made a sacrifice to part with him. And that takes an immense amount of strength. And Esther, of course, was married to a Persian king who wanted to annihilate Jews. And he didn't know that he was with a Jew.
Why is it important to you that the church and the people of the church hear more about these women?
Because the stereotypes of women have always been the supporters. There's not much. I didn't even know there was a word called matriarch. I've only heard patriarch, and I just thought, wow, these men wouldn't be here unless there was some woman. And then nowadays you always hear the term, oh, there's always a powerful woman, every good man. So I was like, well, where were the powerful women in the Bible days? You got these men who were running, nations and wars, and who were the women supporting them? And I found it very important to break down the stereotype that we were just caregivers, that we were just baby makers, and to show that some of these women were extremely political and forth-thinking and foreseeing. They could see what they were looking for. They knew what the bigger picture should be. They saw outside of themselves. They saw outside of what the world had to offer, even what their husbands had to offer. And I think that in the church we're not really taught that as women. We're taught to be silent a lot. It's changing nowadays, of course, because the power of women is taking over.
And people like you are bringing it to the forefront. Absolutely.
Without any apologies. And I'll answer any questions about my lady. Every part of my statues, it's there for a reason. What's exposed is exposed for a reason, and what's not is not exposed for a reason. So like my ladies don't have faces.
Okay.
They just have the forms of the nose and the sockets where the eyes would be.
And that is because?
The face wasn't important. We don't know what they look like. They weren't there. So their position, it's their posture that I have them in that tells their story. It's not their bodies. It's not any of that. It's when you look at them, you see them in this position doing these things, and you go, why is she doing that?
How have women responded so far?
Usually I get a really good response. I had one woman at Chicago Temple come up to me immediately, and I was just getting my stuff off, and she said, I saw these women as soon as I got off the elevator, and they spoke to me and they speak my story. I said, really? She said, Ruth who's bent over to represent her backbreaking work that she'd endured with Naomi, and she said, when I lost my child at 22, that's how I felt, that I was just trying to pull myself back up together. Then she moved on in Esther. She's like a queen on her throne, and she's being torn from being on her throne and keeping her head up and looking toward her
very
faith.
different posture.
Very different posture. It's like someone trying to pull themselves up off of a chair. And she said that was me trying to get back up and regain my strength. And then Hannah is praying incessantly. So she's on her knees and she's praying, and her hands are open to represent receiving what God has to come. No matter what it is, she's just ready to receive. And she said that's where she is now, ready to receive what's coming next. So I thought,
in a very personal way.
And she read everything exactly what I intended for those sculptures to do.
That had to be really neat.
Yeah, it was neat.
What has your interaction with these three women been like as you've formed them from clay?
I was drawn to them. I became, and we were looking for a word for this earlier, I became sort of obsessed with making sure they came alive. Every time I'd add a piece of clay and walk away, it was like they were calling me and saying, can you finish my leg? Can you please finish my leg? I need my leg. So I kept going back to these sculptures, and as soon as I'd finished one, I even thought in myself that I was going to run out and just say, okay, yeah, at least I know I could do it now. I wanted all of them done.
Has anything been hard for you in the process?
I didn't have one problem along the whole way. And most sculptures, they're clay, so they have the tendency of blowing up in the kiln. If you have anything, a little piece of rock gets in there, it will just crack the whole thing. I didn't have any problems with them. And if I did, they were totally fixable. There was nothing that devastated me. So I really felt like they need to be here.
Thank you, Tamarra, for sharing your wonderful work with us. I'm Polly Toner for Different Drummers. Keep the faith.